Ecclesiastes 1:9. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. The writer of Ecclesiastes is saying that if you pay attention, if you look closely, you will see events and circumstances repeating itself over and over and over again. This repetition is called patterns. In this video, we will apply the pattern of Ecclesiastes 1:9 to revivals and their connection to plagues, wars, and other events throughout history. We will begin in the 13th century with the Black Death, also referred to as the bubonic plague. This plague killed over 50 million people from 1347 to 1353. The Black Death is believed to have originated in China and spread to the rest of the world through the Silk Road, which was a trading route where all kinds of valuables, including spices, sugars, silver, and gold were exchanged. As deadly as the Black Death was, something far more deadly will also make its way down this Silk Road to Europe: gunpowder. Gunpowder was invented in China during the 9th century. However, it didn't make its way to Europe until the 13th century. Though there were many wars during this time, the foundation for the wars of the future was being developed, including cannons for battles on land and even equipping naval vessels with cannons for battles on the seas. Now let's look beyond the natural into the supernatural. In the midst of death, if you pay attention to the pattern, you will always see life. One of the purposes for the Black Death was not only to destroy man, but to prevent someone from doing something supernatural. God raised up a monk named John Wycliffe, who is considered a predecessor to the Great Reformation movement. This monk, along with his team, translated the Bible into English. The significance of this is that one day soon, English will become the world's most spoken language. Matter of fact, today, over 1 billion people in the world read and speak English. With the Bible translated into English, it also served as a foundation to transcribe or translate the Bible into many other languages. The 5th through the 15th century is often referenced as the Dark Ages. However, the 16th century seemed just as dark, and possibly even darker. Death would come as a double-edged sword with plagues and wars, particularly to the beautiful indigenous peoples of the Americas. Historians believe over 56 million Americans, nearly 90% of the population of North, Central, and South America, died from various diseases and wars brought over by the Europeans in their quest for fame, gold, and dominion. Once again, in the midst of this darkness, there is the pattern of Ecclesiastes 1:9. In this dark world, a door to the light began to open a little wider by another monk named Martin Luther. Martin Luther penned his 95-point thesis paper on the doors of the church. During this time, not only would they not let you read the Bible, but you couldn't even go to God for yourself. You needed a priest to go on your behalf. This paper, written by Martin Luther, exposed many dark truths about the darkness and corruption within the church. And in this paper, something important would be revealed. This was the truth of Hebrews chapter 4 verse 16. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. This letter will begin the process of leading men away from the traditions of men and into true fellowship in a relationship with Christ. The 18th century can be viewed as a series of phases. There was no one big plague. However, there were several phases of plagues which killed over 500,000 people. In addition to that, there were several phases of wars which resulted in more than 1.5 million deaths. However, if you pay attention to the Ecclesiastes 1:9 pattern, you will see that just as there were several phases of wars and there were several phases of plagues, there were also several phases of revivals, beginning with the first Great Awakening, which originated in Europe and eventually arrived in America in the 1730s and 1740s, led by a man named John Edwards. This resulted in more souls coming closer to God, and it is also believed by some historians that this revival was actually one of the root causes that would eventually lead to the American Revolutionary War. In the 20th century, there was a plague of all plagues called the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu killed over 50 million people in only 2 years. And just as deadly as the Spanish flu was, the wars of the 20th century was just as deadly. World War I resulted in a death of over 50 million people. World War II resulted in the death of over 75 million people. Let's re-examine the pattern of Ecclesiastes 1:9 in this century. By the end of World War II, we see the mystery of the parable of the fig tree, Matthew 24. The fig tree, the nation of Israel, once again is a nation. Whenever a nation has been wiped off the face of the earth, it has never returned, yet Israel has. Also during this century, God raised a praying preacher named William J. Seymour. This African American man was so desperate for God that in a time of segregation, he went to a Bible school where he couldn't even sit in a classroom. Instead, what he did was stand outside of the window and hear the teachings. This man was so desperate to learn about God that he spent hours and hours and hours praying. This man started the Azusa Street Revival, which resulted in many miracles, signs, and wonders. Historians say many charismatic and Pentecostal churches trace their roots back to the Azusa Street Revival. And this prayer movement that was started by William J. Seymour has resulted in over 500 million souls being saved. God's word is true, saints. Now, here we are, over 100 years later, in the new millennia. We have the COVID-19 virus, which has caused just about every nation to go into lockdown and has infected millions of people worldwide. What pattern can we expect? How many people will die from this virus? Is World War III soon to come? The Ecclesiastes 1:9 pattern is never wrong. Just look, a couple of years ago, Jerusalem became recognized by the United Nations as a capital of Israel. Now, this is very prophetic because God says in 2 Chronicles 6:6, "But I have chosen Jerusalem that my name might be there, and have chosen David to be over my people Israel." But there is also something just exciting about the pattern of Ecclesiastes, and I believe that we are now on the edge of revival, and not just any revival, the greatest revival and outpouring of God's Spirit that man has ever known it, as prophesied by Joel chapter 2 verse 28. And it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. Get ready, saints, because the time for the unveiling of the sons and daughters of God, according to Romans chapter 8 verse 19, is upon us.